Well, hello there, you're watching the press preview. A first look at what is on the front pages. Time to see then what's making the headlines with the consultant editor of the Daily Mail, Andrew Pearce, and the associate editor of the Daily Mirror, Kevin Maguire. They'll be with us from now until just before midnight. So, to the front pages then, starting with the Metro. It claims that the Prime Minister's speech to the Conservative Party conference today contained plenty of jokes, but was light on policy detail, Build Back banter. Mr Johnson's 44-minute speech has been attracting the same criticism from northern leaders. That's in the Yorkshire Post. But the Telegraph disagrees, pointing to his statement about not building homes on green fields. The Guardian is blistering, quoting the business think tank, the Adam Smith Institute, which described the address as vacuous and bombastic. Similarly, The Times says Boris Johnson now faces a backlash from pro-Brexit business leaders who are unhappy with rising costs. Meanwhile, the Daily Mail reports on the High Court's findings that the ruler of Dubai, Sheikh Mohammed Al Maktoum, broke the law by hacking the phones of his estranged wife and members of her legal team. Financial Times reporting that gas prices soared today, then plummeted, having hit 10-year highs after Russian President Vladimir Putin signalled his intention to assist with Europe's supply problems. Experts are apparently sceptical of his moves. So let's hear more from Andrew Pearce and Kevin Maguire. Not a resounding thumbs up from the newspapers that you might expect, Andrew. What did you make of the speech today?
It was a classic Boris Johnson speech. It was barnstorming. It was well delivered. He's a brilliant orator. He had the room in his hands. It would have cheered Tory activists no end. My problem with the speech, however, was it didn't address some of the pressing issues right now, supply issues, food shortages, HGV driver shortages. He did talk about HGV, actually, to be fair, but it offered no solutions for the current problems that are going on. There was a lot of optimism, a lot of boosterism, some of which I think Keir Starmer should try and peel off, because his speech, he's so dull and grey by comparison. But how this will play in the outside, I'm not sure. I think it was probably one of his best speeches, but it was policy light.
Yeah, I mean, Kevin, it was genuinely funny and entertaining in parts, was it not? But that's the question for everybody. It's the reality versus the optimism bit. Dismissing the current crises, be they gas or petrol, the answer to present stresses and strains, he said, which are mainly a function of growth and economic revival, is not to reach that same old lever of uncontrolled immigration. I mean, you know, it's meant to cheer people up in the hall, isn't it? But there's stuff going on outside, isn't there?
Yeah, no. Look, the entertaining part was an after-dinner speech. You could have imagined him having a glass of wine in his hand, and he'd had a few beforehand. But this was an 11:30 address, really, to the nation that was then going to be cut up by broadcasters such as yourself to show the highlights. It's going to be written about. And I think he got the mood wrong. And this is what could be his undoing in the end, that the attack by Keir Starmer last week, that is trivial, came across in a way. He almost corroborated what Starmer said, because there is much, as you say, is happening. And that's why you get those two conservative groups, the Adam Smith Institute, or right-leaning groups, and Bright Blue, having a go, talking about it being vacuous, as you say. And one of them is quoted in the piece saying, look, people are going to tire of the banter if he doesn't tackle these crises on rising taxes, rising prices, petrol, and labour shortages. He didn't really address that. I think I could see why you would like that if you were half cut yourself late at night and you'd been at your middle manager's conference all day. But the whole liked it. But you look at the reaction, not just in the papers, but you look at the reaction from the public. I was looking at the opinion research instant response of the UK public. They preferred the Starmer speech, which surprised me in some respects, because they thought Starmer came across as stronger than Johnson, more in touch with Johnson. He cares more than Johnson. He's more competent than Johnson. The only area that was won by Johnson is he's seen as less boring than Starmer. We kind of know that, but he needed a serious speech. I don't think that was a serious speech.
Yeah, it's interesting, isn't it? Why also take on business? Who explained really that they may have been hesitant in reaching for investment because of Brexit delays and concerns, and then the pandemic. Why attack them now, given in many respects they're really up against it because of fuel and gas prices themselves?
Look, this is a prime minister who has turned the kaleidoscope upside down. He's deliberately attacking business, and he's making the point, and he's got a good point, that a lot of businesses did thrive on cheap labour from Eastern Europe. Some of that labour has gone back because of Brexit. Some of the people went back to Eastern Europe because of the pandemic. But there's no doubt that the huge influx of Eastern Europeans into this country, brought about by Tony Blair lifting the immigration shutters, depress wages in this country. There's no doubt about it. And business can't wriggle their hands and say, "Oh, don't criticise us." They did do very well out of the cheap labour, and that is going to change now, because that access to that cheap labour has gone, which means wages are starting to go up. We've seen it already with HGV drivers who were being paid abominably. That's part of the big reason why we've got so few of them, and also their paying conditions are just deplorable compared to what you get in continental Europe. So it's interesting that he's deliberately, I think, picking a fight with business. So you've got a Tory Prime Minister taking on business because he says he's speaking up for workers who want higher pay. That will probably play quite well in the Red Wall and other parts of the country. And I think it's a deliberate strategy. And it's also to contrast with Keir Starmer, who effectively said in his speech last week, the way to sort out the current supply issues is to bring in 100,000 migrants. And Boris Johnson saying that isn't the answer. And I think that will probably be quite popular.
Government statisticians, experts under Conservative rule have said that actually migration, there was little, if any, evidence that wages were suppressed. There was some in unskilled areas, but only very small. What's happened here is we've gone from a labour market of 450, 500 million to one of 60 odd million, and a few shortages create huge problems. And for instance, a lot of attention's been on trucking and petrol deliveries. But if you look at something like the pork industry, where now farmers are having to slaughter and destroy pigs that will never be eaten, they won't get actually into the food chain. There's a shortage of butchers. By the time those butchers are trained, there may be no pork industry anymore, because cheap meat is now coming in from the European Union because we're not producing it here. It's a huge gamble now. He's playing it in part, Johnson, as another culture war. It's along with statues and union flags. He wants to now play a migration card. That's what he's doing. He keeps claiming wages are soaring. Well, it's a statistical quirk at the moment, because a year ago in the pandemic, so many low-paid people lost their jobs, and the ONS warns repeatedly that figures shouldn't be used the way that Johnson is. Not that he's really bothered about the truth in these circumstances. And of course, the government said wages rising apparently rapidly was just down to lower paid people dropping out a year ago. And that's why they broke their own pension triple lock. Yeah. And all of a sudden, he's now claiming wages are roaring ahead. It just ain't the case.
Yeah, they say, don't they, that this sort of wage inflation without the productivity and the skill sets to go with it isn't the right sort of inflation. It'll soon get gobbled up by cost of living increases. But certainly there appears to be, with this talk of immigration, a continuation of banging the Brexit drum in order to keep on side those voters who lent or otherwise their votes to you in the 2019 election, Andrew. But so too, you've got to keep the Shires happy, which takes us to the Daily Telegraph. The PM pledges no homes on green fields, throwing out all this planning reform that was supposed to happen.
Well, that's very interesting that the Telegraph have gone for that line, and I can see why. I used to work for the Telegraph for a long time, and they are addressing their readers. The Prime Minister said, we will build more homes, but we're not going to build them on green fields. Now, that will be cheered up in the home counties and in the Shires. And this is a direct result, I think, of the Tories losing the Chesham and Amersham by-election. and is a really safe Tory seat that has never been anything other than Tory since the war. And they lost it on a huge swing to the Lib Dems, and the Lib Dems opposed the planning reforms. So those planning reforms to build on Greenbelt and Greenfields are dead as a dodo. And now the Prime Minister says we're going to go back to building more on brownfield sites. Quite right too. And reuse land that's already been used. Quite right too. That's a proper good policy. But what he's got to do, though, is make sure they do start building houses, because that's a key part of the levelling up agenda. And housing is a really, really critical part of it.
Yeah, brownfield sites more expensive to build on, I suppose. But yeah, Kevin, quickly, because I want to get to the other papers.
Yeah, because he spent a lot of time talking about Stoke Poges in Buckinghamshire, which is one of Britain's wealthiest villages. He was talking about Stoke Poges rather than Stoke-on-Trent. I think that shows where his heart really lies. Sorry, Stoke-on-Trent, you were just useful in the election. But the target in the manifesto was 300,000 new homes a year. There's about 250,000 being built now. And the Telegraph say that that manifesto promise may be another one that will be about to drop. Because you're right, that building on brownfield land is more expensive than greenfield, but it should always be there. But the fact that is, it's where do you want to put the homes? Often where you want to put the homes, because there's pressure in the southeast, there isn't the brownfield sites to build on. But people who've got a nice house in a nice village, I understand the NIMBY instinct, but it does shut out other people.
Yeah, just a quick look at the other papers that you were going to talk about as well. The Metro, with the jokey part of this, Build Back banter. Oh, have you lost them all? OK, they're coming. OK. Build Back banter. I'm running ahead of myself, aren't I? Build Back banter after the Build Back better, and the Build Back beaver, the introduction of beavers, and the Build Back burger, I seem to remember as well, because the Americans are taking our beef now. And the Yorkshire Post as well, just quickly. Lots of promises, but little policy in Boris Johnson's speech, suggesting that there was hoped for details on regional rail, this infrastructure as part of levelling up that they were hoping for that was missing. More time to talk about that, of course, later. But next up, how an intervention from Vladimir Putin brought gas prices coming back down after a big spike. Back with that in just a moment. Well, welcome back. You're watching the press preview. With me now, Andrew Pearce and Kevin Maguire. Welcome back to both of you. So to the Financial Times we go now. Gas markets whipsaw, as in they have mad fluctuations after President Putin offers to stabilise energy prices, at one point going up 27% today, Kevin. This feeds into what we talked about earlier about cost of living, gas prices, whether the government's reality is striking back, but also that President Putin seems to have us over a barrel on this one.
No, absolutely, Anna. And some blame can be attached to the government over not getting alternatives, gas storage, and so on. But the government is also a victim of world events and can't control them. And voters could punish the government for that as well. But these gas prices are incredible. At the beginning of the year, it was about gas was 50p a therm. And then it went today to more than £4 a therm until that real philanthropist, that world do-gooder, Putin, said he could increase supply. And then it came down to £2.71. When you're dependent on countries such as Russia for gas or the Saudis and others for oil, you are in real trouble in the world. And Putin will love flexing his muscles. Whether he increases production, well, let's wait and see. But he will just like to know he's playing with countries in which he has very poor relations, and where a dagger's drawn with the Russians, and yet we are also dependent.
Yeah, and the difficulty is obviously with the removal of the uplift in universal credit and gas prices going up because many people have had to switch supplier because their suppliers failed. The cap has changed, obviously, too. This is really tough looking at winter for very many people now, Andrew.
Huge. And there'll be a real worry about fuel poverty. And it is terrifying to think that we are dependent on the whims of a despot like Vladimir Putin. But we are so dependent on Russian gas. And look, we've invested all these billions of pounds in wind power, and there hasn't been any wind. It's a perfect storm. It's been one of the I want to use the right expression here, the least windy period in years and years and years, which has added to the crisis over fuel. and there's a real problem. And I can see, and that's another reason why I'm uneasy about this cut in universal credit. If only they'd postponed it till next spring, when people could at least get through the winter, when their gas bills are going to be going through the roof.
Kevin, I know you wanted to talk about Saudis on the brink of the takeover of Newcastle United. You have to read about that. Front page, small story on the front of the Telegraph. For now, thank you both very much indeed. Good to see you both.